Hey folks, just like every Saturday, I'm here to talk about an episode of a superhero animated series, and today I'm talking about the two-part episode of Batman the Animated Series titled Shadow of the Bat. As always, if you haven't seen the episode, then you should if you care about spoilers, because I will be spoiling stuff as I sum up the episode before I get into the review itself. There's a new cop in town, Gil Mason, and with his help, the Gotham PD have taken out several of the gangs in town. Bruce is suspicious of this fast work, as he should be, because someone has framed Gordon for taking bribes from Rupert Thorne. Batman is of course on the case, but Gordon's daughter Barbara doesn't think that's good enough, so she impersonates him to boost morale at a rally in Gordon's honor. Eventually, Barbara and Robin separately find out that Gil is behind the framing, and Batman finds out that Two-Face is behind Gil. Robin, Batman, and Barbara, now calling herself Batgirl, all work together to take out Two-Face and Gil and free Gordon and clear his name. Cue credits. Unlike some of the previous two-parters, this one actually feels like it deserves to be 2 parts long. Sure, because it is 2 parts, some of the scenes feel a little bit stretched out, but it's not as bad as it has been in the past. This episode is pretty important because it finally turns Barbara Gordon into Batgirl, a move that fans were certain to know was coming as far back as Heart of Steel. And while I like the character of Barbara Gordon in the comics, especially as Oracle, I'm just not digging her here, for a few reasons. One is that I just don't buy that she could ever become the competent crime fighter that this episode wants us to think that she will one day become. Batman spent most of his life training to fight crime, and Robin spent the first 8 or so years of his life training as an acrobat, and then spent the next decade or so training to be a superhero. But Barbara hasn't done any of that. This series does the same thing that the live-action Arrow does, and says that if a body takes some self-defense classes, then that's good enough for her to put on a costume and be a superhero. And yes, this episode does have Barbara mess up several times, so it's not like it's trying to say that she's a competent crime fighter yet. But the next time she shows up, is this series going to remember that she should still be a rookie at this point, and not as competent as Batman or Robin? I don't think so. And the other reason I'm not really on board with Batgirl's introduction to the series is that this series was already pretty fuzzy as far as supporting characters goes. Batman's had Robin with him since the 2nd episode, but there were huge gaps in the series where Robin was nowhere to be seen. If the cast was more concrete in this series, I think I'd be okay with the introduction of a new character. This is the 57th episode of this series, and if Robin had been a presence in this series for all 57 episodes, then by the time you get here, you would probably be ready for things to be shaken up a little bit. Now Robin can be a senior member, helping the new kid learn the ropes, instead of perpetually being the one playing second banana to Batman. We've seen this sort of thing in shows like Justice League, where the first couple of seasons had a set cast of about 4 out of 7 characters for any given episode, and then for the next couple of seasons, the cast was expanded so that any number of characters might show up. But that expansion would have meant less than nothing if the first few seasons had already been a playground for the entire DC universe to show up. The introduction of Batgirl ultimately falls flat because there are going to be many more episodes from here on out where Robin doesn't show up, and even more episodes where Batgirl doesn't either. If she's going to remain just as important as she was before this episode, you kind of have to wonder why they even bothered outside of servicing the fans. Beyond that, my issues with this episode are few and far between. Like I've said before, this series really doesn't do mysteries very well. As soon as Gordon calls this new cop by name, I knew that we couldn't trust him, and sure enough, we couldn't. This is mainly because this series has a set cast, and when you introduce a brand new character, and then suddenly Jim Gordon is being arrested for taking bribes, it doesn't even take Larry Holmes to figure out that the new kid is behind it. This episode also indulges in what is quickly becoming one of my least favorite tropes in fiction, namely the "why didn't you just shoot him" trope. The first part of this episode ends with Bruce, dressed as underworld informant Matches Malone, finding out that Two-Face is the one behind Gordon getting framed. Two-Face doesn't trust Matches and says that he'll let the coin decide his fate. The coin lands on the bad side. In theory, right then and there, Batman should be a goner. Of course, we know he's going to make it out of this situation, but it would have been fantastic if he could have gotten out of this situation from his own ingenuity and not the raging stupidity of the villains and then Robin rescuing him. So when Two-Face already knows he's going to kill this guy, what does he do? He calls Gil Mason to meet him to see if he recognizes Malone. Admittedly, part of this is so that the plots concerning Batman, Robin, and Batgirl can all converge, but it doesn't make what Two-Face does any less stupid. That's about all I have to say. This wasn't a terrible episode. The plot was big enough and the stakes were high enough to warrant it being a 2-parter, but the introduction of Batgirl doesn't really move me in the way that it does other people. So what did you guys think of this episode? Like it? Hate it? Let me know in the comments below what you thought. And if you liked this video, you'll be happy to know that I'll be doing a similar review for an episode of Batman Beyond next weekend. And the week after that, I'll be doing another review of an episode of Batman the Animated Series. And if you did like this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.